Welcome to the PR Resolution podcast. I'm your host, Stella Bayles. In this podcast series, I'll be interviewing experts in emerging areas of PR. We'll be taking those hot topics in public relations, dispelling any myths, breaking down the jargon so you are completely clued up and ready to speak to your stakeholders by the time you reach the office. If you have any questions around the episode, please feel free to tweet me at Stella Bayles. In this episode, I interview Danny Bell. Danny is known for producing and directing TV shows we all know and love, such as Big Brother and Love Island. But he has some really unique experience because he is increasingly working with brand teams and agencies on video content. And with the change in how we're all now consuming TV, the merge in editorial and owned content, and the decrease in TV advertising budgets, I think that we're in a really interesting space in how brands can reach audiences through video. And that's exactly what I'm quizzing Danny on. In this interview, we cover brand involvement in traditional TV right now and what's working, why a lack of integration between production and brand sponsorship can often mean that both parties miss out. Danny also shares some insights around traditional TV versus online audiences and how the engagement metrics and audience metrics really differ between the two. We also explore whether a PR agency could come up with a TV show idea and why getting directors and producers involved early into the idea development can result in access to huge audiences. Basically, if video content is part of your brand plans, the next half an hour is gold dust. Here's Danny. This is a topic that I've really wanted to explore for some time now, and that's the relationship of public relations and TV content, especially with the move of the increase of on-demand content online now. And I know that I speak to a lot of PR people right now where in a lot of brainstorms, people will say, especially for consumer brands, let's make a TV show. And it doesn't always happen very often, but there is still a place around for brands in TV. So Danny's got some really interesting experience on both sides. So I'm just really keen to see where you think it is placed. So going right back to the beginning, have you ever seen some examples of brands involved in TV and what's worked?
You know, I think there's been some really good examples recently of brands sponsoring TV shows. Like if you think of sort of Love Island, I think it was last year Superdrug with a Love Island sponsor. And in my head now, I absolutely associate Superdrug with Love Island. And interestingly, on that kind of Superdrug Love Island deal, that they sponsored kind of all the TV programming around it and also the Love Island podcast. That was the number one podcast for the whole of the summer, and that was up against kind of the World Cup when it was on and was beating World Cup podcasts. And Superdrug had a really kind of prominent presence within that. And I think from what I've heard about that those podcast hours counted as programming hours as part of the deal they did with Superdrug. So, you know, a podcast that's costing like a fraction of the price of producing a show like Love Island obviously worked well enough for that brand to kind of think they got enough engagement with it to sort of tick those boxes kind of in terms of hours delivered. But in terms of like actual shows made by a brand, I think what's amazing is that no, I sort of can't think of loads of examples. And then I think it's kind of a few different reasons for that. I think some of that is there's still a sort of snobbery within channels that something brought by a brand is just automatically going to be a bit shit, which isn't necessarily the case. But it's sort of like ad-funded programming is sort of looked at. I think a lot of the times it's still looked at as kind of a second-tier product generally with shows. And then another reason for that is there's still kind of pretty strict rules and regs around product placement within shows that I think limits the ways in which brands can genuinely be integrated into TV shows.
So going back to your TV experience, I know that you've worked on reality shows like Love Island and Big Brother in the past. At what point when you're in the production, does a brand get involved, and were you involved with the brand at any point? So coming from the PR point of view and from a marketing perspective, where do we start to speak to the production team or not?
Yeah, you know, I'd say like with most things, I'm sure this won't be a massive surprise to most people listening to this. It's not all things aren't always paired up in the most efficient way as possible, and it's kind of like generally within a TV channel there'll be a separate team that are working on marketing deals and sponsorship deals than the editorial team, and they're kind of generally speaking aren't too joined up. Like I remember a few years back, I made a show for Sky with Rihanna that Rihanna was kind of the executive producer on, and Sky were kind of, everyone was very excited about it kind of happening. And at the time the show got commissioned, there wasn't a series sponsor. And kind of in the background, all these conversations were going on, and we were halfway through shooting the series, and the series was like a load of fashion designers sort of working in a studio making clothes for pop stars. Absolutely nothing like Project Runway, if anyone from Project Runway is listening. And halfway through us shooting the show, Sky did a deal with Diet Coke to become the official show sponsors. And they were like, right, so everything within the show, the only drink that anyone can ever be seen anywhere near has got to be a Diet Coke can. And we were like, well, we'll film 6 weeks of the show and it's a working studio and they've been drinking whatever they're drinking. And we ended up sending the finished edits to some like special effects company who'd done Star Wars. And then, as if by magic, every like can on a desk in the studio or every drink or every anything miraculously became a Diet Coke can.
Wow.
And you totally wouldn't have noticed seeing it, but it's like that would have been a lot easier if that conversation had happened before we started shooting.
2 questions that spring to mind there. Are you ever involved with the conversations with a brand and like whether that was successful or not? Like how do they ever measure success with that?
It's all a bit like the Wild West, I think, generally in the terms of like content generally, but include TV within that like I used to do a lot of work for Adidas, making sort of football content for them that worked really well online. And I remember looking at this stuff thinking, well, this should just be in Football Focus or should be on BT Sports before a game. And I think the issue with that then, of kind of getting that onto TV, was actually, because it had come from that agency world of doing it more than a TV world, was actually just too many people involved to then have a really straightforward conversation about then placing that on a TV channel. And it was like, I remember having conversations with people within Adidas, and it was just a bit like, actually, yeah, this stuff we're making could live within a TV show, but then actually the conversations then were like, how do you then balance that up against it existing digitally? And an issue there that we came to a few times was like, actually prominence in terms of like a brand, the prominence of a brand and logos, like you can get away with 1 million times more digitally and online than you can within a TV show. So with the stuff I was doing for Adidas, when like everyone was wearing obviously was Adidas, and they were holding an Adidas football, and it was on a football pitch with an Adidas logo on it, was very, very Adidas. And actually, like if you were being strict about that then broke a lot of broadcast regs in terms of prominence of a brand within there, even though actually that content with those, we had access to the biggest players in the world, the biggest clubs in the world through Adidas, and you'd think that like if you were BT Sport, you'd murder for that content to go before a Champions League game. But there were just kind of issues around prominence and stuff. And I think actually kind of like, in my experience of doing that, I think I've not been involved in a lot of projects where everything's been true, or any actually, if I'm being honest, where everything's been truly joined up. Where you start off talking to the brand, talk about the product and talk about exactly where it's going to land, and then work within that world of going, well, actually, what's the compromise to make it work as a TV product and as a digital product? Do we shoot 2 versions of it? And it's actually everything, as with most things in the universe that we all exist within, a lot of these conversations happen a bit too late.
So the Adidas example you just mentioned, just focusing on that for a second, was that online content? And at what point did they get in touch with you? Who got in touch with you? It'd be really interesting just to see that process. Yeah, I mean, like the way I work generally is, and this, I don't know how useful this is to people listening to this podcast, is generally quite unconventionally. And the way I ended up working with Adidas worked in a pretty unconventional way that I think like traditionally the way of a brand making content is it goes back that kind of down that agency route. That like with Adidas, they work with a load of different agencies. They work with We Are Social, who were their kind of social agency, who I ended up working with a lot, and kind of ran their social stuff. And the kind of a more traditional model would be the people within Adidas are talking to the people within that agency, and they come up with the creative together, or the agency lead it, and it goes on that platform. I kind of came from it from a slightly different angle, but ended up sort of working really well, was that I was working for a production company, a kind of TV and film production company. I had a really old friend of mine who was head of football at Adidas and just really liked the stuff that I made, and we'd sort of worked together in the past, who got in touch with me directly about kind of, it was just before the World Cup, in the Rio World Cup, and the guy who was the head of football at Adidas was a really, really smart guy, and he was out in Rio setting up for the World Cup, and he was like, I'm on the ground in Rio, I can see with my eyes that all anyone cares about here is football and reality shows. Can you make me a reality show about football in Rio that we put out around the World Cup? And I was like, the World Cup's in a month, mate. So yeah. And then obviously we totally couldn't do that. Yeah. But that opened up a bigger conversation with the production company I was working within about kind of, is there other content that we could make around that? And
we ended up kind of doing bits of content with them for their digital platform that we made as a production company. We Are Social kind of worked. We worked with We Are Social, but they sort of worked almost like the platform, the broadcaster in a way of doing it. And it went out, and actually we approached it a bit more like a kind of, or my approach to that was a bit more like a TV approach, because that was my kind of background and the stuff we did. And what it meant with a brand like Adidas is actually, for the first time with a bit of Adidas we were working within, we were engaging with their football players more to get them to do stuff where they talked more and did stuff that felt a bit more kind of televisual in that way. And then but felt a little bit different to kind of stuff you might have seen digitally that's a bit more kind of visual and was just a bit more product focused. And my approach was a bit more like, no, make the man say the thing and do the thing and engage with them in that way. And I ended up kind of over the years, after that, kind of over the years doing a lot more stuff with Adidas and working within some of their agencies and kind of doing some stuff directly with them. And my approach was always like, actually, how do I take my TV sensibilities and pair them up with your brand sensibilities and then kind of agency sensibilities and try and create stuff that feels a bit different?
At that stage when you're creating something like that example for the World Cup for Adidas, has there been a conversation around the audience and then the distribution of that content? Like, did you know at that point how Adidas or the agency was planning to release this content?
That's the one thing I'd say that kind of that agency universe and that brand universe are way ahead of in terms of like traditional TV, is knowing their market, knowing their analytics, knowing who they're aiming stuff at, and knowing how people are engaging with things, wanting to sell product. Do you know what I mean? It's like at the end of the day, it's like if you're a sports brand and you're launching a new football boot, you want to sell those football boots. So you're coming from a point of view of going, well, we know that our audience is 13 to 17-year-old boys who are into these type things, and they buy the product and they engage in this way. And actually those conversations as a content maker and a program maker, you should think that brand involvement that way should be taking away the creativity. I love those conversations because you just think, right, I totally know now who we're aiming at, what the brief is. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, it's to sell some of those football boots. And then your job as a program maker or a creative is just to think creatively around a way that doesn't just feel like a 3-minute commercial.
Yeah.
Whereas in television, it's like, you're driven by the creative and there isn't really that brand involvement. In that way, sometimes that feels a bit less targeted.
So if, for the TV experience that you just mentioned, when you are going into that creative sort of build, I guess, with a show, what is the brief? Like, is it just that somebody has a concept, or do you ever get that kind of audience targeting? That's because it's really interesting, because I've always been PR marketing world, so that kind of, and also agency world. So I get a brief, and it's a tight brief, and there's a delivery at the end of it. Like, and sometimes, especially in digital marketing agency that I was working in, it's like, this is the audience brief, and we need X sales off the back of it. So it couldn't be more targeted. So do you ever get that kind of audience brief?
You get briefed. I mean, maybe it's because my background is a bit more mixed between the two different sides. I actually wish TV would move on a bit and actually be a bit more honest about kind of the art. So like in TV, you'll get a brief from a channel that's like, this year what we're interested in is shows about XXX, shows that are like a gang show that feature a bunch of people doing stuff. We want more reality shows. They'll have a focus, but it's still a bit like blue sky speak and a bit vague generally. And I think the thinking behind that is, they are thinking like they want a range of creative ideas and don't want to be too specific. But actually, sometimes if you're dealing with an agency or dealing with a brand and the brief is, we need to sell 5,000 pairs of football boots, and this is the aim, and this is the demo, and it's boys of this age, and it's in these countries. And actually, I think, for me, and the way my brain works, makes it easier to think of the creative, because you know really clearly kind of what you're going in on. Yeah. Whereas a TV brief is a bit more general. But then the good side of that kind of TV briefing is like, you can go in with weird ideas.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And and some of them turn into TV shows, or with some of the TV shows I've worked on before, like when I did Big Brother and some of those big reality shows. Within there, they're almost like you're testing out mini formats within those shows. Like, there's a few things on Big Brother that we did as tasks on Big Brother and then got turned into their own formats.
Oh, really?
So it's kind of like the creative brief is a bit more open, but it also means in that way things flop occasionally, and they get it, channels and companies and producers, we get it wrong sometimes, and they just flop a bit more. But actually, like, I'd sort of hope that as a TV producer and someone who loves making TV shows, that the way TV shows are commissioned sort of would use modern tools a bit more and use analytics a bit more and actually be honest about kind of, and actually then I think, and it's really weird because like as a program maker, you have nothing to do with the people who sell ad space. which is really weird to me.
Yeah.
So you'd sort of think like if you're doing Love Island or Big Brother or one of those shows and they're funding that by selling advertising slots, you'd sort of think that at a senior level on those shows you'd be having conversations with ad sales teams and and the teams that are selling those sponsorship deals, and you're not having any of those conversations.
It is interesting because, again, stuff that I learned once I was left sort of PR, moved to more into digital marketing, and I was working with a paid team. And also I was speaking, we've both got shared connections in the TV world, and I was speaking to somebody in TV around that time. And that producer that I was speaking to had no idea of the capabilities of paid advertising and how it had progressed. So and I was just explaining some of the ways that people can be targeted online at the same time as watching a TV ad, and if it has the same kind of content, and if it had the same kind of content as it did within the TV show or some kind of alignment, then they can just respond a lot easier through social ads and all sorts of things. It'd work so much better. I think maybe it will hopefully get there in some time.
I find now the model of ad breaks and advertising that we still work to now hasn't moved on in years. Like suicidal for the television industry. I look at that now in the age of streamers and the age of Netflix, when people can skip through the title sequence of a show, never mind 5 ad breaks in it, of 5 random adverts. Do you know there's nothing joining that content up?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and in that way that like the team and the commissioning team even within the channel that have made that show have had nothing to do with ad sales.
Yeah.
And who does that end up being? I find that now in the age we're in now, like so bizarre.
I think that's probably why we're seeing brand teams and marketing teams moving budget more into branded content that you're working on more and more, and sponsorship, maybe like editorial sponsorship, because they can see more return, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Just looking at that sort of area, and again, put myself in the PR team and being able to work with you, you mentioned that you really love being able to see the results of that kind of work. So if there's been, how many people might have seen that content. Do you, when you're working with these teams, are you sort of finding out like what kind of targets they might have? How much information do you A, want to see, or B, get given in terms of like the delivery?
Working with brands, I like just being told what the aim is. So for me, it's like the more that I know about what they're trying to sell, the more I know about what they think their demo is, the more I know about where this stuff's about where it's being placed completely. And I've done some jobs where they're more joined up and the agencies have been more joined up, and some where they are less so. When I worked with We're Social and Adidas, they were really good at knowing everything we were delivering. So it's like there'd be someone there in the early days of Snapchat, there'd be someone there just shooting the bit of it that would go on Snapchat. We had Instagram deliverables, we had deliverables that went onto their Facebook page, some that went onto Adidas's YouTube page, some that went onto their .com. And we knew about all of these things, and you were going in there kind of knowing that this stuff had to be completely multi-purpose. And actually, like some of the stuff I used to do for Adidas was really unique in the way that it existed digitally, primarily, but also I used to work on a show called Game Day Plus that Adidas made. It was a pretty traditional magazine show, but did really well for them on their kind of digital platforms. But that show also got played in Adidas stores around the world. It got played on the screens at stadiums before Champions League games. I think they sold it to an airline, and you could watch it on like a plane somewhere. And it's like the stuff we were shooting had to be used so multi-purposely that you could never have gone in not knowing that. If you'd just gone in to shoot some cool stuff, it would have been a nightmare then to kind of trying to reversion into all those things. But if you go in knowing all of those things, and as a TV producer, it was quite weird for me at first when you'd go, oh, what, that kid's flown in from Germany with an iPhone just to shoot the Snapchat content. And that seemed at first mental to me, but then you go, no, that's amazing, because that's where they get their engagement.
Yeah.
So actually, it's really smart.
Yeah.
And working in that way is really, really smart, and that Snapchat content is totally engaged with.
That example that you've just explained there just makes a marketer's eyes light up with that amount of content that you've just mentioned, and the audiences that could engage with that is just huge and really exciting, because then I'm sat here thinking, God, and then you could pay to promote it and all of those channels, like the audience size is massive. But yeah, and then you're saying about somebody coming in to film Snapchat, That must be quite a new thing for you, is it? Or has that been going on for a while? And how involved are you with that? And who was it? Is it an influencer or was it a part of the Adidas team?
It was part of the... Occasionally, when I was doing Adidas jobs, occasionally we'd be part of the Adidas team, occasionally we'd be part of the agency team. But they had a clear brief. They were capturing stuff to go on that platform. It's the same with you'd capture stuff that would be for an Insta story or Instagram then Instagram stories as they kind of took over as a way of engaging with things. And it's a very different to the way kind of TV traditionally has worked. TV is moving on in some ways in this way, but nowhere near quickly enough. The way a lot of TV shows work is digital is looked at as an absolute afterthought. And the digital teams are looked at as kind of this win-it stuck onto things that no one wants to deal with, which is really weird for me when you sort of go, no, that's how everyone, especially for a young audience, that's how everyone engages with everything. As TV's audience gets older and older and older, actually, weirdly, I've noticed that on a lot of big shows and kind of big things, they're caring about digital less and less. It isn't becoming this thing where you sort of go, no, we're totally living within a digital age and digital is becoming more integrated. I think digital is actually in some circumstances becoming less important because the real audience of those shows are people in their 50s at home who aren't going to be on Snapchat and aren't going to be on Insta. If you look at a show like The X Factor now, it has much less of a digital presence than it had a few years ago.
Yeah.
Interestingly.
So do you think that shows that are only streams, like a Netflix special or something, do you see that they have more digital support?
Well, interesting, there's kind of those Netflix shows have sort of no digital backup because they are the digital product. The show is the digital.
Yeah.
But there's actually an amazingly low amount of sister shows to those kind of big shows that are put on those big streaming platforms. In the old days, of me doing Big Brother 10 or 15 years ago, and there would be Big Brother's Little Brother, Big Brother's Big Mouth, digital content that went out alongside it. You look at Riverdale on Netflix, there's not a Riverdale spin-off, or if there is, I don't know about it. Do you know what I mean? But there's not because they don't need them.
Yeah.
Because those shows are the content, and also as a viewer now, particularly as a young viewer, a thing that never existed when I was starting out kind of making shows is you can binge content now. I'd work on a show, you'd wait a week. Being drip-fed digital content has kept your interest alive over that week. Now I can go and smash in 97 hours of Game of Thrones.
You don't need to
watch the lesser budget stuff to keep my interest.
Yeah.
And also you kind of get that engagement now through fan sites and through memes and through kind of that social content now that And interestingly, and this is me just talking very anecdotally because I don't know the real data on this, but what those streamers are doing now in a really smart way is they're starting to engage in social content in a way that's really, really clever. If you look at Bird Box, the Sandra Bullock film that absolutely smashed it in for Netflix last year, apparently, so I don't know whether this is true or not, but Bird Box went meme crazy.
Yeah, it did.
It was on everywhere. And apparently that was completely strategized by Netflix, that they opened loads of kind of, I say fake, but not fake, they opened loads of fan sites and meme sites and started creating these memes before the show dropped, or around the time the show dropped. So all this meme content was naturally being shared,
right.
But they'd set these accounts up in advance to do it. And that completely blew up the amount you noticed that film and talked about that film and engaged in it socially. And some of that was organic, but I think apparently a load of that was the marketing team at Netflix.
So interesting how it's changing. A little plug for the podcast, actually. I'm interviewing 2 meme experts, if you want, which is a new job title. But 2 guys from Lad Bible have just started up their own agency to work with brands, and they just know about how to make memes go crazy on Instagram. So, that's coming up next week. In some ways, it's surprising. In some ways, it's not. And it works.
I remember the first time I used the expression meme culture in a meeting, I did it as a dare. Because I was that sounds absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, I'll say that in a meeting. And now I use it all the time, unironically.
Yeah.
And that meme world, it's just a thing people engage in.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think that's the thing that we all need to catch up on. We have all these businesses and industries that are based around massive machines producing stuff, and that's all monetized. That's how we all pay our rent. But there's a whole universe now of just stuff being created digitally and shared that isn't part of a massive machine necessarily and isn't monetized, and it's happening. And what's happening is things like that Bird Box Netflix example is, because we all work in businesses, we're all just then trying to monetize this stuff and ruin it and work out how it can work for us. Do you know what I mean? It's like we always do. But actually, the sort of amazing thing is that like all this stuff kind of exists organically.
I guess just looking at that, because we've been talking about social content quite a lot, and that's the world that we live in. But you still involved in TV, but you have been involved in big budget shows and high quality production as well. How do you feel about going from sort of high quality production budgets when you see an influencer video being shared hugely and that doing really well, and it's on an iPhone?
Interestingly, I could talk about this shit all day.
Okay.
This is an argument I often have with people within the TV industry. I think I come from a very different standpoint to the television industry generally, is that I don't see that stuff being made by influencers on a phone as low quality. Like, I actually just see it as modern.
Yeah.
And I actually look at the stuff we make now that's like the bigger budget stuff with more cameras and more edits. To me, it's all about where that stuff's going to end up. Like, if you're placing that stuff that like I'd make traditionally as a TV show, shot on 5 cameras and has gone through an edit and a grade, you drop that on a social platform, it just looks fake.
Yeah.
People aren't going, oh, amazing, it looks so much better than the kid in the room who talks for 3 minutes. They're just going, it's fake and it's edited and it's not real. Whereas like the influencer in a room doing like a makeup tutorial for 25 minutes with no edit in it that gets 10 billion views. Do you know what I mean? That's real content.
And maybe because our audiences now are just way more savvy, brand savvy, aren't they?
But I also just think like a lot of it is like technology has moved so quickly, especially in terms of technology of being able to make content, is actually shooting 4K on an iPhone in stereo isn't massively low quality.
No.
You sort of go, oh yeah, it's like someone filming it on their phone. You go, yeah, that phone is a better quality camera than the cameras that I was shooting on when I started making TV shows.
Yeah, it's not a BlackBerry.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? Like, this stuff doesn't look terrible.
Yeah.
I think also it's just that difference now of like, young people particularly, they're just engaging in things in a different way. Like, what they necessarily, that audience wants isn't necessarily the service we provide as a traditional big production company with millions of cameras and a grade and all that sort of stuff. Maybe that just in some circumstances isn't what people want.
It's just, I think we just have to sort of keep seeing how it works. What's something that you're working on right now in terms of brands or recently worked on? It's just good for us to just see what's going out right now in terms of example.
With my TV head on, I'm kind of developing a few, I'm working with an American production studio, sort of developing some new ideas, a sort of studio that do scripted and unscripted, and I'm kind of working on a lot of unscripted things. And kind of, and interestingly, the American company I'm working with are called Gunpowder and Sky, and one of the things that really interests me about them is they own a stake in a really, really interesting digital platform in America called Cut. And Cut make these really, really good films that are really, really simple, shot on a couple of cameras in a white room, that are basically people revealing things about themselves and telling stories. And they get 200 million views a month in their content.
Wow.
And that's like, and what they are is they're amazing at casting, amazing at telling stories. It is so simple, the stuff they do, and that's their kind of vibe and their style. And you know one of their videos straight away when you look at it. And they've created their own little formats to do really well. Like they have a format called Fear Pong that gets loads of hits, a format called Truth or Drink. Really, really simple formats. And I'm kind of working with Gunpowder at the minute and working with Cut about like looking at ways of turning the stuff they do digitally into television formats and looking at clever ways of doing that isn't just, oh, well, you point more cameras at it. Do you know what I mean? And that's the way you look traditionally. And actually sort of go, maybe that isn't. Maybe for some of their formats, that is a clever way of doing it. Maybe there are smarter ways now than doing that. It's like, are there ways of using all that stuff that they shoot online, that massive library of footage they've got, and using that for a TV format that works in a way that, do you know what I mean? That there might be a smarter way of thinking about ways of working with them. And
the TV learning from digital now.
And when I talk to the guys at Cut, I'm like fascinated by the way they think, and they know who engages with their stuff in a way that you might not know that way from a TV show that you've made. In the relative recent past of my life, I've done a bit of work with a sports platform. And that sports platform, what was really interesting about the way they work is having some of the conversations we've been talking about here does throwing a million cameras at things make it higher quality, or just make it a bit weird for an app? Having conversations that a lot of kind of digital platforms and apps are having about kind of what makes something premium now. Yeah. And I think that's a constantly changing thing.
So just keep testing and learning. Again, with my PR team hat on, and really because I have the experience of the listeners here, and I know that many people will be sitting on the tube right now with this in their ears and thinking, I need this information for my next brainstorm. At what point could a brand team, PR team, marketing team, digital team, who have all of these brainstorms for the content across the year, at what point do they speak to somebody like you?
Again, it's like I kind of work quite unconventionally. The way things generally work is that agency model. That then everything's controlled by agencies. The brands speak to whichever agency deals with that bit of whatever it is they're doing. That agency then work out a way that works within the agency model to then talk about how things work. But generally those agencies won't have a massive realistic understanding of television. Do you know what I mean? In terms of like plugging stuff into TV, because there isn't a natural fit to jump into TV, because TV works like quite a separate industry. So that agency might be experts on digital platforms, print advertising, radio spots, kind of whatever their expertise is. But there's very few people who then understand how you then take Revlon and get Revlon a show on Channel 4. But then within Channel 4, there's like sponsorship teams, but they're not massively joined up within those agencies. And I kind of work in quite a unique way in that, like, I've always just been driven by doing cool things and working, whether that's a TV show or with a brand. And like, and for me, it's about like, I love working on new platforms and working in new ways. And it's like, for doing that. So I kind of work quite independently. So sometimes I'll be brought in by a brand, sometimes I'll be brought in by an agency, sometimes I'll be brought in, generally my work is kind of working with TV channels. But there's not a lot of people that kind of join all of those things up.
I think that even just from the information that we've explored in this podcast, for a PR team, knowing that they don't just go straight down to the Channel 4 door and say, hey, we've got an idea. There's an awful lot of people involved.
The thing I'd say is, for a brand or the agency they're working with, the clearest way into a TV channel is to partner up with a production company, and the production company goes in. That production company can go and have meetings with those commissioners at channels and talk about programming. There are big companies whose jobs are putting ideas with brands, actually, but it's a bit weird. They're kind of like, they're quite big corporate machines, these companies. So it's a bit like they'll just be looking on their slate at a list of brands, looking on their slate at a list of formats, and are like who they can glue together. It won't necessarily be the most creative process.
I think that based on everything that you've shared with me today, it feels, if I was in that PR team, I would be thinking not to go down the TV route, and just especially because we have to measure our work in so much more detail and prove the impact with any kind of PR or marketing work now. Online content and all of those different formats. Yeah, so Adidas example you said just sounds like a dream, a marketer's dream, if there's the organisation up front.
Yeah, in terms of like watching television on a television, very hard to get like decent analytics back about any of that. Like even the way that those ratings are rated is so arcane and old fashioned and out of date. On a television, it's a bit better when people watch through the digital platforms of a channel. Like if you're watching on iPlayer or 4OD or the ITV player, they have a bit more information then about who's watching them. You know, because you have logged into those things. But it's still not like massive detail. Or if it is, those channels aren't generally sharing that information in a way that you might be more used to, you know, if you're working in a kind of purely digital way and you're getting analytics back. Like even the way like Instagram works now, when they can give influencers really detailed analytics on who's engaging in their content, like you don't get that from television.
I'm actually interviewing a tool called Hook It, which is just for Instagram influencers and analytics, and because that's just growing for brands putting their budget there. So yeah, it does seem to be growing. Just on that topic, you mentioned the Adidas example where they had invited in the guy to film the Snapchat and Instagram, etc. Was that a one-off, or does that happen a lot more? Have you worked with influencers?
When I've worked with kind of bigger brands before, you know, like an Adidas or a big kind of sportswear brand that are working with bigger budgets, do you know what I mean? Bigger teams and bigger budgets, yeah, kind of like a lot of that, like that happens a lot. And what's weird is like, as someone from a TV background, it's funny like when we were talking earlier about going, you know, like production values, and from a traditional background, production values mean an expensive DOP and an expensive lens and loads of cameras and all that kind of stuff. And actually, like, a lot of the time, that's still the way you're working, a lot of the way people think. But actually, like, for me at first, I was like, what, someone has flown in with an iPhone to shoot Snapchat content? What a waste of money. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I wouldn't have batted an eyelid at spending that on an extra camera for my proper content. But even then, in that learning way, even then you sort of go, no. Like now, it makes much more sense to me now to have that person there filming the Snapchat than throwing loads of cameras and money at the glossy, high quality content. It makes much more sense for me to go, no, that person's doing something for Insta, that person's doing something for Snapchat, and you go, well, yeah, you're just hitting loads more platforms and loads more eyeballs in that way. Like, you still want the whatever the glossy bit is you're doing to be glossy, but I totally understand that spread in budget to hit like multiple platforms.
Do you share your vision for that kind of example? Do you share your vision with the people shooting for Snapchat or Insta, or is it they've already been briefed? Like, how much are you working with them on a shoot?
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to depend on kind of like if I'm working directly with an agency and I'm part of that kind of agency team, then yeah, it's a bit more joined up. If I've just been brought in as a sort of exec or a producer or a director on something, not so much joined up generally, that you're concentrating on your little bit, and the Snapchat person's concentrating on their bit. But as with everything, the more joined up and the more communication there is, the easier everything always is.
Do you get the measurement results sent back to you from a team, the view numbers or any kind of reports or anything? With my measurement, I'm a bit of a PR measurement fan. So
I think if you're doing a job and you're working like within an agency team, then yeah, totally. Do you know what I mean? And you're with the Nike team or with the Revlon team or whoever, then yeah, that they're all over those kind of analytics. If I've just been brought in as like a director to shoot a thing, it's very much like you're a kind of gun for hire when you go in and shoot your thing and disappear, and that's kind of all you hear of it. Like,
do you find it interesting to see those results?
Super interesting, yeah. And I'll be all over like the YouTube or the Instagram, checking how many likes it's got and how many views it's got, and all sort of thing. And I'm sure like everyone, all those directors and producers are kind of probably doing that, because you're just like, even in an ego way, you're just like, how many people are watching my film? But but I just think I think in the way that you talk about kind of data. Like, we all should be obsessed with data. For the first time ever, we actually have access to that data. And, like, no one really, on a print advert in a magazine, no one really knows who's looking at that and seeing it. But now when something that's going on a digital platform or a social platform, you actually can get those analytics. And that's kind of amazing.
It's how we learn, right?
Yeah, totally.
Cool. Thank you so much. That's really, really, really insightful and so useful. So I guess just on the last note for the usefulness, if somebody wanted to work with you and they're part of a brand team, how could they?
Again, in a very unprofessional way, best way of getting in touch with me is probably through Instagram.
Oh, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Great.
I blame Danny. I blame Danny on Instagram. That's probably the best way of getting in touch with me. It's really weird. Like, you sort of go, well, it's a bit ridiculous as a man, like in my 40s, doing all that shit on Instagram. But like that's how people engage these days. Yeah. And even now, like in a way of like, if I'm researching a show, a TV show or another bit of content, and there's someone I'm interested in to be involved in that project, I'd get in touch with them by DMing them through their Insta.
Slip into their DMs.
Yeah, and it's like, but interesting with all that stuff, and that's kind of like, in a way, that is why the world's a slightly nightmarish place for a lot of us in these industries, and also an amazing place, is that like, in that way, you're skipping management, agencies, agents, which is kind of good and kind of terrible. Yeah. But actually, like, it sort of means now, like through things like Instagram, everyone has a direct line to everyone.
Yeah.
Which sometimes is amazing, sometimes is like nightmarish.
We should do this interview again in like a year or 18 months just to see how it's developed. It's so interesting to see that. All right, I blame Danny on Instagram for all of your creative TV content needs. Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Danny. It was brilliant.
Amazing, thank you.
This is the PR Resolution Podcast. Keep in touch by following me on Twitter @Stella Bayles. For more reading on PR, head to blog.coveragebook.com. Don't forget to tune in to the next episode and make sure you subscribe to the series on iTunes now. See you there.